Good morning. We talked about your debt service. Your debt service consists of two pieces, two things make up your debt service. Perfect. Perfect. Two pieces that make up your debt service. That's okay. That's why we're refreshing, right? Awesome. Thank you. Everybody in? Think about your debt. Your debt implies what? That you owe somebody some money, right? So when we're talking about the lender, what monies do we owe the lender? Well, we owe them the principal because that's the amount that I borrowed. When I marched in the bank and I said, give me money to buy a house, what they gave me was the principal. So the principal is part of my debt service. The other piece of that debt is the interest, because that's what the lender makes for letting me borrow their money. Does that make sense? So my debt service is the money that I owe the bank. And specifically what I owe the bank is my principal. I got to pay them back. And then the interest is what they charge me. Do not most of your monthly mortgage payments, here we go. Most of your monthly mortgage payments consist of four pieces, don't they? Your principal, your interest, your 1/12 of your taxes, and a 1/12 of your insurance. Taxes and insurance don't go to the bank. Taxes go to the county, insurance goes to the insurance agency. So remember, when we're dealing with financing, we're putting our lender hat on and we're thinking through the eyes, thinking like a lender. So your debt service is going to be your principal and interest. What questions do I have? Good way to get us warmed up. We did some math last week with your debt service. We amortized the loan monthly. We were given a full or level payment. Your payment's the same every single month. And we amortized the loan. We figured out how much was going to be applied to principal and how much is going to be applied to interest each month. In just a bit, we're going to go over the formula. If the problem doesn't give you the monthly payment, then we're going to go over the formula for you to find that monthly payment. So we're going to solve that missing piece of that puzzle. So this is where we left on Thursday. And we're talking about your qualifying ratios. Just kind of introduce you to the idea that conventional and FHA have two qualifying ratios. VA only has one. We're going to do qualifying a buyer math in just a bit as well. And we're going to use the conventional ratios. We're going to use the 28 and the 36%. So we will revisit these. We will talk about what these numbers mean when we get to that math. So don't get too bogged down just yet. So picking up where we left off, first off, what questions do I have before we officially get started? Everybody got your lender hat on? As we wrap up this, yeah, put it on as we wrap up this unit. And before we get into the math, the last piece of this unit is just kind of some lender laws that we need to be aware of. So with our lender hat on, and one thing when it comes to the lenders, we mentioned TILA the other day. TILA is the T in TRID. TRID is our TILA RESPA integrated disclosure. And there's some lender laws that the lender has to follow, some TILA laws that the lender has to follow. First off, TILA is also known as Regulation Z. TILA is also known as Regulation Z. Write that down. TILA equals Regulation Z. In the event they ask you about Regulation Z on your test. When you see TILA, when you see the T in TRID and you see TILA, I want you guys to see lending. TILA tells the consumer, how much does it cost me to get this loan? What are the costs of getting this mortgage loan? TILA applies when a lender's involved, first off. So shake your head yes or no. If this is a cash buyer, does TILA apply? If it's a cash buyer? Yeah, no, because if it's a cash buyer, there is no lender around, is there? If there's no lender around, the rule is there are no rules. So the lenders are the ones that create the rules. So only when you're getting a mortgage loan, not all mortgage loans, just most that are residential, for example. Commercial loans are not covered under TILA. There are residential loans, and this applies to conventional FHA, VA, the loan types we talked about last week. We also introduced you guys to the CFP last week, brief introduction. Remember, post-housing market crash, a lot of these lender laws stepped up, and the whole point is to protect the consumer. That's the whole thing that TRID stands for, is protecting the consumer. And one of the best ways that we can protect the consumer is by educating the consumer. Let them know this is the details of your loan. Guys, post-housing market crash, I wasn't in sales yet, but post-housing market crash, I had agents tell me stories about buyers not knowing their numbers, buyers not knowing, for example, what their monthly payment would be for the next 30 years until they were sitting at the settlement table being told just to sign. Does that sound fair? I mean, this is a 30-year commitment. You're not given time to crunch numbers or even think about it. Oh, just sign here. Don't worry about it. It'll be all right. Now, please don't misunderstand. Not all lenders conducted their business this way. I certainly don't want to imply that. But there were evidently enough out there. And so TILA and TRID stepped in and said, we need to protect the consumer. And that's where we got the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Name kind of says it all, doesn't it? And one thing with TILA that the lender has to follow is that there's certain chief disclosures, certain things that have to be disclosed on the loan estimate. So what are these chief disclosures? We're going to talk about the loan estimate when we get to Unit 14. The things that need to be disclosed, these chief disclosures that need to be disclosed, the APR is the entire financial picture. It's the interest rate plus the other financing charges of the loan. So the APR gives a bigger, better picture than the interest rate. The loan estimate also has to give the lender financing charges. We're going to look at a sample loan estimate. The number and the amounts of payments and the total amount financed. How much are they borrowing? We got some other lender laws when it comes to closing and the loan estimate and the closing disclosure, and that's where we're heading in Unit 21. So we'll discuss more about the loan estimate. Right now, we just need to know that the lender follows some TILA laws, and there's certain things that must appear on the loan estimate. TILA also for the lender puts advertising regulations on things. There's certain things that the lender, the mortgage lender, can and cannot advertise. They need to be careful with any of their ads. And specifically, TILA says that they need to watch out. They need to be aware if they hit any trigger terms. And we're going to look at some examples of this in just a second to make sure we're clear. But a trigger term is a specific number in the ad about the loan. It's the difference in saying low down payment versus zero down payment. If I say low down payment, have I set a number? No. If I say zero down payment, have I set a number? And what TILA tells the lender is that if you hit a trigger term, if you hit a specific number about the loan, you got to disclose it all. Here's the deal. If the lender hits a trigger term in their ad, if a lender mentions a specific number, their ad is implying that the loan is a one-size-fits-all. And we all know that we have different credit scores, we have different credit histories. If we really wanted to have some fun this afternoon, we could all, when we logged out of class, we could all call the same lender and try to get pre-approved to purchase the exact same home. But because you and I have a different story, I'd be willing to bet we're going to walk away with different down payments, different payment amounts, different interest rates, right? Because we all have a different credit history. We all have a different credit story. And this is what TILA is trying to avoid. If you say a number, then you got to disclose all of the terms, because loans are not a one-size-fits-all. So the lender needs to be careful in their wording. They need to be careful in what they say. Specifically, trigger terms include the exact amount of the down payment, the exact amount of any payment, the exact amount of the number of payments. They need to be careful about saying like a 30-year loan versus a 15-year loan. The repayment period and the exact dollar amount. So the lenders regulated on how they can advertise their loan product. They need to leave it open for everybody. So let's look at a couple examples together, talking about a specific number, talking about a trigger term. We already used the zero down versus low down payment. Another example might be $600 monthly payment versus low monthly payment. When you hit a specific number, and this is important, about the loan. If the number's not about the loan, then we haven't hit a specific number. So we're looking for those numbers about the loan, and it's the difference. They can say low monthly payment, that's allowed. But what TILA says, if the lender says $600 monthly payment, that's pretty dang specific, isn't it? And if the lender is bold enough to say $600 monthly payment, then they need to give all the terms of this loan. They need to disclose it all. Please, 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 y'all want to know some way your test may like to trick you? Please, 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 when I hear me say numbers about the loan, is the list price about the loan? Is the list price how much for sale it is? No. Are HOA dues about the loan? Is the tax amount about the loan? So I need you guys to be careful, because you're doing these test questions and I hear you, you see a number and you get excited and you say, oh, that was a trigger term. The lender messed up. They violated TILA. Just because you see a number, now you need to stop and ask yourself, is it about the loan? So what happens is, we said, if a specific number is hit. Well, if one number, one trigger term is hit, then the lender has to disclose all of the information about the loan. What do I mean by that? If they hit one trigger term, they have to disclose the total loan amount, the actual amount of down payment, the frequency, number, and amount of payments, the interest rates, and the total required payments. Again, TRID and specifically TILA are trying to avoid the lenders falsely advertising. If we protect the consumer, we're not telling everybody out there that we all qualify for the same loan, because that's just not realistic. So when it comes to violating TILA and TILA's advertising guidelines with these specific terms, with these trigger terms, I hear you guys, you know, like, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? This is a lender law. I'm going into real estate school. Why are we discussing this? Why do I care about this? Well, first off, let's talk about what happens if this lender law is violated. You could be looking up to $10,000 per day. I'm at the bottom of page 409. $10,000 per day, other fines, depending. You could be facing prison time. And how do you think the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is going to feel about this with your license? Probably be facing some disciplinary action. So why do we have to have this conversation? Again, the lender's the one disclosing this stuff. Why does this care to us? Let's say you have your license and you take on a very nice listing. And you decide, once you take on this listing, that you want to do a broker open. Maybe you want to do, let's do a nice afternoon wine and cheese. Doesn't that sound nice? You want to invite all the agents in the Triad MLS to come to your new listing, and you're inviting them over to have wine and cheese. You're inviting them over so they can tour your listing, so they can see your listing. And obviously, if they have buyers interested, maybe we can, you know, sway them to bring their buyer. So you're preparing this broker open, and you call your preferred lender. You call your lender buddy and you say, I'm doing a broker open on my new listing. Do you want to go in on it with me? And your lender buddy's probably going to say yes, because what a great opportunity for your lender buddy to meet other agents that work with buyers. See how this helps both of us? So your lender buddy says, yeah, I'm in, that sounds nice. And then your lender buddy says, let me do the flyer. They advertise the broken open with their contact information, and they also include yours. Now, do you care about whether or not trigger terms and TILA laws are being honored? Absolutely, because that flyer has your picture, your name, your email, your phone number on it. You are a part of that advertising. And if there's a violation of TILA, you too could be responsible. So my suggestion to you is have your lender buddy send you that flyer so you can proof it before it goes out. We can't get away with this. Oh, I was an agent, they did it. Guys, we know how social media works, yes? Once it's out there, it is out there. Questions on TILA and advertising and trigger terms? I actually saw, as another example, I actually saw this in MLS a couple of weeks ago. And we have, when you get into Triad MLS, your access, we have a agent only remarks. So we can share stuff amongst each other without it going out to the public. So if there's something you want another agent to know. And I saw something in the agent only remarks, and it was like, it was seller financing, but it was still about the loan. And it was talking about the amount, the down payment, da, 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 da. And I took it to my BIC because I'm all about protecting my fellow agents. I know there's a lot out there, and I know there's a lot going on, and I'm certainly not trying to call somebody out for making a mistake, but I do think if I were sitting in that person's shoes, I would want to know. And the debate came up about whether or not it applies because it's not a traditional loan, it's seller financing. The buyer's assuming the seller's loan. They still have to qualify, but they're not taking on a new loan. The loan already exists. And in the end, we decided that it's a close one, but I don't think it's going to be a TILA violation. So again, just because you see a number doesn't mean it's time to get excited. but my flag went up. It caused me to ask some questions. Had it been originating a new loan and all those terms were being given, absolutely, that would be a violation. What questions do I have? Okay. Another lender law that the lender has to follow is the Federal Equal Credit Opportunity Act. The lender has, as does the agent, we both have protected classes. The lender's protected classes are just a little bit different than ours. We will actually do a side-by-side comparison of their protected classes and ours when we get to Unit 19. But right now, just focusing on the lender's protected classes, you cannot be denied credit because of your race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, or any dependency on public assistance. Please note, age is assuming that the applicant is 18 years old, assuming that this is an adult. Who's protected under the age category? Let's say, for example, you have a 90-year-old that goes to the lender and applies for a 30-year loan. That 90-year-old cannot be denied credit, cannot be denied the loan based on their age alone. The other thing that the Federal Equal Credit Opportunity Act says that if an applicant is denied credit, if they're not going to get approval, the lender needs to inform them of why within 30 days. And the reason why they don't get that credit better not be because of one of the protected classes. If they're not getting credit, it better shake out to their debt to income ratio. So Equal Credit Opportunity Act, again, very similar protected class, but there are some differences. So we'll compare, we'll do a side-by-side comparison of ours versus the lenders. Another lender act is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is what gives us a right to check our credit report. We can do it free once a year. How many people do that once a year? Yeah, I'm kind of bad about that too. A few of you, good for you. I need to get better about that. Here's the deal. Something hits your credit. We know the three sources, right? Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And what you can do with this free credit report is check and make sure there's nothing that's hit your credit report that you don't know about. And this is where I need to get better, because if something's hit my credit report, I'd rather find out about it now to get it taken care of, as opposed to when I'm applying for, I don't know, a home loan and have it pop up there. So we have the right to check that. And there's several different sources. And that credit report gives us your credit history for the last 7 years. Bankruptcies stay with you a little bit longer. That's going to stay around for 10. Another thing the lenders need to be aware of is loan fraud. Loan fraud's bad. Loan fraud's just really, really bad. You lied, or the borrower lied on their application. They had an application. They submitted incorrect or false information so they can get bigger loan, more of a loan. When underwriting discovers that, the applicant could be subject to, and that's not a misprint, by the way, that number of zeros is correct. So now we're looking at fines of up to $1 million and 30 years in prison. Loan fraud's bad.
Is this for the lender or the borrower? Or
Well, if the
both?
borrower commits loan fraud, yep. But it's a legislation that the lender needs to be aware of. Remember the other day we were talking about what happens if the home doesn't appraise for the sales price, and we had the different options. We can see if the seller will be willing to reduce the purchase price, or maybe the buyer's got some money laying around. But one thing they probably wouldn't be able to do was obtain a loan, because they're already trying to get a loan. They may be able to get a gift, but whomever gives that gift, the lender's going to make them sign something saying, this is a gift. I don't expect this money to be paid back. And if they sign anyway, they could be subject to loan fraud. The last act is the Predatory Lending Act. This is all about consumer protection. All about another one about consumer protection. And there's some restrictions on some high-end loans. There's limitations on the fees and the charges that lenders can put on the borrower for originating the loan. Please always remember, all lenders are different. There is no across the board, lender can charge this amount, or the interest rate has to be this. All lenders are different, which is another great reason why we want to encourage our buyers to shop around so they can compare and contrast lenders. It prohibits unfair, deceptive lender practices. No more shady lenders. Shouldn't be any more shady lenders. And then the big thing with consumer protection is educating the consumer. Letting them know this 30-year commitment that they're getting ready to make. We're going to talk more about RESPA, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act in 21. We just said TILA was about the cost to obtain the loan. What does TILA do? It tells the consumer the costs involved in originating the loan. RESPA tells the consumer the cost to close. So while the two are integrated and they do work together, they still do two different things. We got more on RESPA to talk about in Unit 21. So we'll discuss some RESPA. Questions? So the last piece of 15 is a couple pieces of math. And before we pick up a calculator, turn with me in your books to page 412 and 413. 412 and 413. Yeah. What we're looking at 412 and 413 is your mortgage factor chart, also known as a rate factor chart. Now, please listen to me. I get this question a lot. You do not have to memorize this. Is that good news? Okay, you don't have to memorize this, but we do need to know how this works, because you might be asked, particularly at PSI Testing Center, to find the rate factor. And the rate factor is part of the formula that we're getting ready to introduce you to. So first off, it's important that we understand how the chart works. The first column on the left where it says rate, that is the interest rate. I would even write that over the word rate, write the word interest, so we know what rate it is that we're referring to. The rest of the columns are the terms of the loan. Is this a 10-year loan, a 15-year loan, a 20-year loan, a 25-year loan, or a 30-year loan? And how you find the rate factor or the mortgage factor, two names used interchangeably. You first find the interest rate. So you take your finger and scroll down, you find the interest rate, and then you go over to the term. And that number will give you the rate factor that we're going to use in the formula in just a second. But before we do that, guys, tell me in a private chat, what would your rate factor be if you had a 6% interest rate for a 30-year loan? Tell me in a private chat what that rate factor would be. A 6% interest rate on a 30-year loan. %6 interest rate on a 30-year loan. %6 on a 30-year loan. Everybody in? So we took our finger, we went down the interest rate column until we found 6, and then we just slid over to the right until the 30-year term. And we saw that your rate factor would be a 6.00. That's the number we're going to plug in just a second. I have had former students tell me that when they go to PSI Testing Center, this chart is like huge and it's blown up on the wall. So when you come to this question, you can just look over at the wall and find your rate factor. Yep. If they don't give you the rate factor, then they have to provide you with the chart. Everybody good with that? They don't expect you to memorize this thing. I don't expect you to memorize it. We just need to know how to use it. So what do we do with that 6.0, for example? What do we do with that rate factor once we find it? Well, that's where our formula to find the monthly principal and interest kicks in. And to find our monthly principal and interest, we need to take the loan amount. We're going to times that by the rate factor and then divide it by 1,000. They will give you the loan amount. They will either give you the rate factor or the interest rate in the term so you can find it. They will not give you the 1,000. They may give you some other numbers too, try to distract you. So that's why it's important that we know the basic formula says to find your monthly principal and interest, your loan amount times the rate factor divided by 1,000. I think all formulas should go on flashcards because knowing the formula is like 80% of the battle. So you either have formula flashcards or you have a piece of paper and you've called it formula. And the ones we've done in class so far, you're adding to it. So you have them all together to study them at the end. Everybody have this jotted down? Rephrase that. Anybody not have it jotted down? Is everybody good? So tell me in a private chat, what's the miller's monthly debt service? Oh, sorry. You got 30 more seconds, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So what do we do first when we see a math problem? It's the very first thing we do. Just read it. Just read it. I know we see numbers and our instinct is to don't cry. It's okay. It's okay to cry. No, but I know our instinct is to see the numbers and pick calculator up and do something with them. Please take a few deep breaths, slow down just a bit, just read the problem and focus on what it's asking for. So this one says the Millers are borrowing $350,000 at 4.5% annual interest for 30 years. Using the mortgage factor chart, it has been determined that the mortgage factor is 5.07. What will the Millers monthly debt service be for this loan? No, you're good. So let's just pretend for a second we don't know that 5.07. And let's go back to our book on page 412. If we had to find it, we would go down to 4.5% interest rate and then slide over to the 30-year term. And that's where we got that 5.07. So again, either it's going to give you the rate factor or it's got to give you the interest rate in the term. So we've read the problem. We know what it's asking for. So to solve for a monthly principal and interest, we're going to take the loan amount times the rate factor. Nope, times the rate factor. And then we're going to divide it by 1,000. So when you take 350,000 times 5.07, we get a really big number. And then we divide that by 1,000, and we get a monthly principal and interest, a monthly debt service of $1,774.50. Now we have the monthly payment every month for the next 30 years. Quite frankly, we now have everything we need to amortize this loan for the next 360 months. Questions on finding the monthly principal and interest? Let's see, if it doesn't give you the factor, it has to give you the rate, also known as the interest rate, and the term. Is it a 10-year loan, a 20-year loan, 30-year loan? So if it doesn't give you the rate, it has to give you the two pieces you need to find it. Again, big chart I've heard on the wall. Doesn't it sound like they decorate nice at PSI Testing Center? You'd think they put like pictures of clouds or puppies up or something to help test takers stay calm. But no, you guys get a rate factor chart. Hold your place in the book and go back with me real quick to page 387. 387. Now you guys have the formula that you need to do numbers 28, 29, and 30. We didn't have that piece last week. So now you have what you need. And I love those problems on 28, 29, and 30. So now you have that missing piece to find the principal and interest. Questions? The other piece of math in Unit 15 is not in your book. You're not going to find it anywhere in your book. It used to be in your book, and then they say, we're not testing students on this anymore. So they took it out of the book. And then they came back and said, no, we still need to teach it because they may see a test question. So they've added it back to the syllabus. They've added it back to the exam, but they haven't added it back to the book yet. So we're going to go through it. I got some practice for you guys, of course. We're going to look at where you can find some of that practice in just a second. So the piece of math that's not in your book, you're not going to find. Close your book. I see some of you looking. I promise you it's not there. Close your book. And the piece of math that you're not going to find in your book that you may see on your test is about qualifying a buyer. And this is where understanding what these ratios mean. Most of the time, when you start working with a buyer, once we've done our disclosures and we've created agency and all that good stuff, one of the early things we're going to do in our relationship with the buyer is get them to a lender, have them shop around, give them the name of 2 or 3 lenders that you've had a good experience with in the past, and have them get pre-qualified. Please make sure you are having your buyer talk to a lender before you take them out, start showing them lots and lots of property. Could you imagine spending all day with somebody on Saturday just to find out the homes you were looking at they couldn't afford? And had they talked to a lender, you would have known what they can't afford. I mean, that's a wasted day for everybody, isn't it? Not just you and your mileage and your time away from your family, but that's a wasted day for them as well. So it's really important we have them talk to a lender before we take them out and show them property. What if the lender's not available? What if your buyer's lender doesn't work weekends, for example, and they want to see something, they call you Friday night? So it's important that we have this basic understanding of qualifying a buyer in the event that the lender's not available. I think back to the housing market that we're just coming out of with it. Homes were flying off the shelf, guys. There were in some cases that homes weren't on the market for more than 2 or 3 hours. People had to move fast. And so you may not have had time for your buyer to call a lender. So it's important, and this is why they added it back, because it's important that we have this basic information so we can make sure, not make sure, but we can get an idea that we're honoring everybody's time, yourself and your buyers included. So when we are quickly qualifying a buyer, and we're just going to use the example of the conventional loans, the 2 numbers for the conventional loans, I feel certain if you see this on your test, they're going to use the conventional loan numbers as well. So the 28-36 are the ones we're going to focus on. And the 28-36 ratios do 2 different things. First off, the 28% ratio looks at housing expenses. And the lender says that housing expenses consist of your PITI, principal and interest, your debt service, 1/12 of your taxes, and 1/12 of your insurance. HOA dues, if applicable, and PMI, private mortgage insurance. We said PMI is going to be on loans, conventional loans, when the loan to value ratio is 80% or more. So if your buyer's going for a conventional loan, 80% or more, the lender needs to take in private mortgage insurance. And what this 28% says in regards to housing expenses, let's look at pie. And let's pretend that this whole pie represents the borrower's monthly income. And what this says is that the lender will allow 28% of the borrower's monthly income to go towards housing expenses. Everything that your household brings in a month, 28% of that can go towards your PITI, your HOA dues, if applicable, and your private mortgage insurance, if applicable. If your housing expenses exceed 28%, you don't get loan approval. And it's not over yet. We'll talk in just a second about what some other options are. But the first number looks at the 28%. 28% of your monthly income can go towards housing expenses. The second number then, the 36, looks at your housing expenses, which we just defined as your PITI, HOA dues, and PMI. Plus, the 36% looks at your reoccurring debt, monthly credit card payments, monthly car payments, student loans, child support, alimony, medical bills. You know those bills you sit down and write a check for every month? Those are considered your reoccurring obligations. And in order to qualify, your housing expenses plus your reoccurring debt cannot exceed 36% of your monthly income. Both pies are about the borrower's monthly income. One is focusing on housing expenses. The other one is focusing on reoccurring obligations, which are your housing expenses and your reoccurring debt. In order to qualify for the loan, the borrower has to qualify under both housing expense or both ratios, excuse me. Their housing expenses have got to be less than 28%. Their reoccurring obligations have got to be less than 36%. If either one of these are over the qualifying ratio, don't spend your time showing them 13 properties on Saturday, because they're probably not going to get loan approval. If it's close, I'll leave that up to you. Here's the deal, you guys. The lender puts a cap on how much housing expenses are allowed, how much reoccurring obligations are allowed. Remember, this is all the money you have coming in each month. And so far, all we've done is paid your your housing expenses and your recurring debt, right? Have you eaten dinner yet? Have you put gas in your car? Have you paid your other bills like, I don't know, electricity, internet, cable, Netflix? So the rest of the pie, the rest of the monthly income goes towards the rest of your expenses. And the lender doesn't want the borrower to be house poor. Have you guys ever heard that before? House poor? Meaning all you can do is afford your house. You can't afford to go on vacation. You can't afford to buy a new pair of blue jeans if you want it, because all of your money is going into the house. And that's what the lender wants to avoid. This is why they put regulations on it. The reoccurring debt is important to the lender because you come into this relationship with that debt. You come into this relationship already owing child support, student loans, alimony, car payments, et cetera, et cetera. So in just a second, we're going to take both of these ratios. We're going to work some examples together in class, of course, and we're going to talk about these. But let's go ahead and look at our formula. And anytime we do qualifying a buyer, we're going to use the same T-bar twice. We're going to use it once under the 28%, and then we're going to use the same T-bar under the 36%. The qualifying ratio is different for each one. So I need you guys to have this in front of you, because when we come back from break, we're going to solve using all three of these. There's something we need to discuss with each of these. I'd say generally in practice, when you're talking to a buyer, what you're going to solve for is that qualifying ratio, because you want to make sure they get under the 36% before you throw them in your car and take them out and start showing property. But we also need to know how to solve for monthly expenses and monthly income. So we're going to talk about each of these when we get back from break. I just want to make sure you guys have this. Please write this down now or take a picture of it so you can refer back to it. Questions so far? Okay, so let's take 10. When we come back, we'll do some qualifying a buyer math. still see my screen? Okay. All right. We're back. So I'm going to take attendance. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everybody have this written down? Everybody have this formula? The only pieces that we have to consider when we're qualifying a buyer is the borrower's monthly expenses and monthly income. And what we're looking for here, does their debt to income ratio work? Does it fall under the qualifying ratios? Please, 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 please note the word monthly. What happens if they give you annual income? You got to divide it by 12. So I need everybody, what they give you annual expenses. So I need everybody to make sure we all see those words monthly. We're focusing on the monthly picture, the monthly expenses, and the monthly income. And what we're going to learn as we go through these is the expenses specifically are the lender's expenses. What are our housing expenses? PITI, HOA dues if applicable, and PMI. So we're going to go through, we're going to solve for qualifying ratio. We're going to solve for monthly expenses. We're going to solve for monthly income. I'm going to give you those formulas for each. We're going to do a sample problem for each. And then we're going to talk about what all this means for your exams and what you need to know. But we do need to go through each. So have everybody on board and ready to go. Looks like some of the cameras have adjusted up. I'm looking at several ceilings. So please, if I can't see you, I don't know you're here. So the first one we're going to look at is about qualifying ratios. So let's just read the problem together first. This one says, Jerry and Shannon are considering purchasing a home. Together, they earn $83,000 per year. Their estimated housing expenses are $1,500 per month, and their monthly recurring debt is $1,100. Would Jerry and Shannon qualify for conventional loan using the 28-36% ratio? So I've read the problem. I know I'm doing qualifying a buyer math. So the first thing I can do is throw myself down 2 T-bars. I know I got to run it twice, once under the 28% with the housing expenses, and again under the 36% with the housing expenses and recurring debt. In this case, we know what the qualifying ratios are, but what we need to find is Jerry and Shannon's ratios, because that's the question. Would they qualify? So we need to find their ratios to see if they are under the 28-36%. In practice, in the real world, this is pretty much what you guys are going to be doing. When Jerry and Shannon call you and say, my lender is not available, but a house just came on the market, I want to see it this afternoon, can you show it to me? Ask them real quick. Well, Jerry and Shannon, what are your monthly expenses? What are your monthly income? So you just have an idea. You're not given the final approval. You're not given loan approval. You're just having an idea before you proceed. So we know that Jerry and Sharon's annual income is $83,000 per year. But remember, these problems solve in monthly. So the first thing we need to do is take our $83,000 annual income, divide it by 12 to get their monthly income. So how much do they bring in a month? And because we're talking about the same borrowers, the monthly income is going to be the same for both, because we're talking about the same people. Questions on how I got the monthly income, $6,916.67. So now let's just focus on the 28%, the first T-bar. 28% focuses on housing expenses. So we know they're estimating housing expenses are going to be $1,500 per month, just housing expenses. The back fourth line in the T-bar means divide. So we take 1,500 and divide it by 69, nope, 69, there it is, 16.67. And that gives a 1,500 divided by 60. That gives us on our calculator like 0.21, we'll say 69. We'll round it out 4. What your calculator gives you is a rate. What we need to do is convert that rate to a percentage. And how we convert a rate to a percentage is we just move our decimal over 2 places to the right. So the rate of 0.2169 shakes out to 21.69%. So yes or no? Would Jerry and Shannon qualify under the 28%? Do they fall under the 28%? So far, so good, right? That's what we're looking at. Do your monthly expenses as compared to your monthly income fall under 28% of your entire monthly income? So far, so good. Now we need to look at our second ratio. Yes, I can. Yep. Your pretty Valentine's Day pink. Happy Valentine's Day, guys, by everybody, by the way. Did you buy into the Hallmark holiday? So now the second number is to look at our 36%, or the second thing is to look at our second T-bar, which is the 36%. And the second T-bar, the second 36% looks at our monthly expenses plus our monthly income. No, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that, please. The second T-bar, the 36%, looks at our monthly expenses plus our monthly reoccurring debt. What are those other obligations that you have? So we've already determined our monthly expenses are $1,500. Jerry and Shannon come to the table with $1,100 in recurring debt. Is everybody with me what I mean by recurring debt? They're not trying to get a new loan. They already have this debt. So the lender absolutely needs to take that into consideration. So when we add those up, I get housing expenses plus recurring debt of $2,600. Back fourth line means divide. So you take 2,600 divided by their monthly income. We get 0.3759, move the decimal over 2 places to get 37.59%. Yes or no? Would Jerry and Shannon qualify under the second ratio? No. And in order to qualify, they have to qualify under both. So Jerry and Shannon could not get this loan. So what does this mean for Jerry and Shannon? Well, I'll tell you what, especially when it's this close, a good lender is going to work with Jerry and Shannon to help them get their ratios down. Why is the lender going to work with them? Because when they get their ratios down, doesn't the lender want Jerry and Shannon to call them? So the lender is going to help them to stay in front of them. You, as their possible real estate agent, stay in touch with them. So when they do get these ratios in line, they won't call you. So touch base with them. Guys, sometimes we have to incubate buyers for a while. So send them a holiday card or call them every once in a while and ask them how little Susie's doing in school. But stay in touch with them. So when they do get this under 36%, they'll call you to help them buy. So what are some things Jerry and Shannon can do? I mean, the obvious solution, right, is just pay off all your debt or just make more money, right? Easy peasy, right? Just make more money. That's all you got to do. Other than paying off debt or making more money, the other thing Jerry and Shannon may want to consider is a lesser mortgage payment, a lesser principal and interest, because that's going to reduce their $1,500. So maybe the homes that they're looking at are more than what they can afford. It doesn't mean they're done. If they're willing to look at a lesser price point and rerun these numbers, we're not too far away from getting them under that 28-36%. So we don't use the 28%, the 36, that's just the name of the formula. In this case, because we're solving for the ratios, again, not just the qualifying ratios, but Jerry and Shannon's ratios, we're using these as a guide. We're using the 28-36% to see if they fall under. We got to find their ratios, which means that's our unknown, that's our X. We will use the 28-36 in other formulas. Other questions? Okay. Can I erase the red? Good. Now, the second piece of this could be solving for the maximum payment. Again, through the eyes of the lender, we're just going to be looking at housing expenses. So there are two different formulas, two different T-bars. I think the best way to see these is to draw a line so we can see them separately. And we're looking at the formula on the left, the T-bar on the right. So there's a couple different ways we can see this. When we're looking at the 28%, we're solving for the number on top. This is their monthly income. And now we know the 28%. The formula on the bottom, again, my T-bar people, we're looking for their monthly income. I mean, we have their monthly income, excuse me. We know that it's 36%. And now the number that we're solving for on top, once we solve that number on top, then we're going to deduct their reoccurring. CUR. Because by solving for X and then deducting the reoccurring, that allows the lender to look at housing expenses versus housing expenses. What does the lender care about? The lender cares about their money. So when we talk about expenses, when we talk about maximum payment, through the eyes of the lender, what we care about, and in order to do a true side-by-side comparison, once we solve that 36%, once we have that X, then we're going to deduct the recurring expenses. When it comes to these problems, I tend to think of opposite world. When the problem asks you for the maximum payment, we're going to run both ratios. We're going to do the 28%, we're going to do the 36%. And opposite world says, when we're going to solve for the maximum payment, the borrower is going to get qualified on the lower of the two numbers. So we're going to have a number for the 28%, we're going to have a number for the 36%. And what the borrower gets qualified on is the lower of the two. Think about it. Lender hat on. Which one is less risky? The one that has more expenses or the one that has less expenses? Less risky says the one that has the less expenses. So think about this through the eyes of the lender. The maximum payment allowed, the one that you will get qualified under, will be the lower of the two numbers. We'll see this again. Actually, we'll do a nice side-by-side comparison. They good? Look a problem? Their new information? Let's see what we got. Brian has annual income of $35,000. His wife Margaret has annual income of $38,000. Recurring obligations are $700 per month. What is the maximum payment they can afford using the 28-36% ratios? I've read the problem. I know I'm qualifying a buyer. So if nothing else, I know I get to use two T-bars. One of those T-bars is going to look at the 28%. The other one's going to look at the 36%. And what we're solving for is our monthly expenses. Brian makes $35,000 a year. Margaret makes $38,000. So together they pull in $73,000 per year. Again, these solve for monthly. Please always remember that. These solve for monthly. So now that we have their annual income, we divide by 12 to get their monthly income of $6,083.33. Questions so far? So let's just look at this 28% first. First ratio first. Up down number means up down line means multiply. So we take $6,083.33 times 28%. And we get housing expenses. 1703.33. Remember that 28% just looks at housing expenses. PITI, HOA, and PMI. So under the 28%, their maximum allowable housing expenses is going to be $1,703.33. Now we look at the second T-bar, and first we need to solve for X. So 6833.33 times 36%. And remember, this 36% looks at housing expenses plus recurring debt. It looks at both pieces. So we take 68.33 times 36%. And I get housing expenses, I'm just going to round here, 90. I get housing expenses plus recurring debt of $2,190. Remember though, the lender wants to do a side-by-side comparison of just the maximum payment of just the housing expenses. So once we found out that the $2,190 is the allowable of the housing expenses plus the recurring debt, now we need to take that X and we need to minus what the problem tells us is their recurring debt. So now we have a true side-by-side comparison of housing expenses under 28% ratio and housing expenses, just housing expenses under the 36% ratio. So which one of these would Jerry and or Brian and Margaret get approved on? Maximum payment, opposite world says it's going to be the, if it asks for maximum payment, we're looking for the lower of the two numbers. So which one will their housing expenses get approved? Their allowable maximum payment will be $1,490, the smaller of the two. Questions on this one? Maximum payment, think smaller of the two. So we've solved for qualifying ratio. We've solved for monthly expenses. So in the last piece of our T-bar says to solve for monthly income. So again, two different things to consider. This problem will ask you about minimum income. And again, if we see this as two different T-bars, formula on the right, T-bars on the left, however you see it. So this case, we're solving for our monthly income. We're solving for X. We know our 28%. And our 36%. The number on top is looking at housing expenses. The number on top down here is looking at housing expenses plus recurring debt. In this problem, we're going to be asked for the minimum income, and opposite world says that these borrowers will get approved on the higher of the two. When they ask you for minimum income, we're looking for the higher of the two numbers. Lender hat on, which one is less risky? The borrower that makes more or less money? The one that makes more. So through the eyes of the lender, we want the higher of the two numbers. So we're going to, again, run this twice. One's under the 28, one's under the 36. Which one are they going to get approved of for their income, their minimum income? We are looking for the higher of the two numbers. We have this? We good? We super excited? I can see it. All right. So one more. Charles and Hannah want to buy a home with a PITI of $1,900 per month. PMI will be $60 per month. HOA dues are $600 per year. Recurring debt is $1,100 per month. What is the minimum monthly income needed to qualify using the ratios? We've read the problem. We're either reciting our formulas or we're throwing down two T-bars. This time, what we're solving for is income. And we got to qualify them, their income, using the 28% and the 36%. So just gotten ourselves set up. So let's look first at the 28%, the housing expenses. So the problem tells us they have a PITI of $1,900 per month. They have a PMI of $60 per month. And then it gives us the annual HOA dues. Do we want to work with an annual number? Never when qualifying a buyer. So we need to take our annual HOA dues and divide them by 12 to get our monthly. So our monthly PITI, our monthly HOA PMI plus our monthly HOA. So that gives us housing expenses, just housing expenses of $2,010. That fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take $2,010 divided by 28%. And I get monthly income of $7,178.57. The second T-bar looks at 36%, which is housing expenses. We've just determined that our housing expenses are 2010. And now we're going to add our reoccurring obligations. The lender needs to look at all the debt. So we add our housing expenses and our reoccurring obligations. I get total of $3,110. That fourth line means divide. So we take 3,110 divided by 36%. So we've run under both numbers. Opposite world. Minimum income says they're going to qualify under the higher of the two numbers. So which monthly income are Charles and Hannah going to qualify under? They're going to qualify under the 8638. Again, which one is less risky to the lender? The one that makes 7,000 and something a month, or the one that makes 8,000 and something a month? And that's what we're looking for with the minimum income. They're going to qualify using the higher of the two numbers. $600 per year, because that's what your test likes to do. I'm just trying to prepare you guys. Would it be a lot less kind if they gave you all monthly numbers? Guess what? Your test isn't going to do. They like to do stuff to you guys like that. Is it mean? We're not really here to debate that because it is what it is. Questions on this one, Charles and Hannah? So now what we have, am I good? You good? So what I did next is just a side-by-side comparison of those two formulas. One to find the maximum payment. You guys already have this. Maybe just want to take a quick picture. Here you go. Let me make it bigger where you can see it. But a side-by-side of those maximum payment and the minimum income. And again, I think the key to these is opposite world. If the problem's asking you for the maximum payment, you want the lower of the two numbers. If they're asking you for the minimum income, we want the higher of the two. And then the third scenario we looked at was finding the borrower's qualifying ratio. Y'all want the good news? I'm in a really good mood today. And it's Valentine's Day. So what the heck? You're not going to have qualifying a buyer math on my exam. You may see it at PSI Testing Center. So what I would do right now is make yourself a big note that says, look this over before I go to PSI. You got the recording. I'm getting ready to show you we got lots of practice. Is that a good Valentine's Day gift? Is that better than a box of chocolates? Mine's taking me out to get tacos this afternoon, so that's a pretty dang good Valentine's Day gift. Any day with tacos is a good day. I don't want you guys to get so bogged down on this, but I don't want you to forget about it when it's time to go to PSI Testing Center. And any one of those could be a candidate. So that's why I suggest you make yourself a note to go back through the recording. It is February 14th. I think we started at what, 9:45-ish? Something like that, give or take. Questions? Okay. That gets us through 15. That gets us through financing. Better yet, lender hat off, chuck it off to the side. We're done with it for a bit. You're not, you still got to study it, but we're done with it for a bit. So those key terms on page 389 in unit 15, there's your key point review. Starts on page 414. And then your student quiz, page 417, which does give you some extra math on finding the monthly principal and interest. Again, you're not going to find qualifying a buyer math in your book. I'll show you in just a second where you can find that in the online learning system. Math concepts on 411 to 413 include that mortgage factor chart. Again, don't memorize it. So how to work it. How can you find the rate factor? If you're at PSI Testing Center, and you see a test question. And then those 50 problems in the back of the book, starting on page 803. These are more finding monthly principal and interest practice. These are the numbers that relate to what we just did. We go out to the online learning system and look at a few things. We're under the 15 material. I can't remember if I showed you guys this last week when we amortized. Did I show you this? Okay, all right, good. So you guys can amortize. If you do this 12 times, you do those 3 steps 12 times. And that's what this is here for, is for you just kind of check yourself. Then there is a practice quiz. No, that's the quiz. Where is it? Here it is, 14 and 15 math. There we go. So here's some extra practice here with units 14 and 15 math. if it feels like loading. And it's all the math from 14 and 15. So there we go. So it's stuff on like discount points and loan origination fee and amortizing. It's everything we did. But what I want to point out is the last three problems are qualifying a buyer math. So when you guys are getting ready for that state exam, you have these couple problems here. Of course, I have included the solutions. So you have something to go back through and kind of check your work. So just focus on the first piece of this now, the financing math. And then you can get qualifying a buyer when you're ready to go to PSI. Questions, comments? Another present I want to give you guys, man, I'm just full of presents today, aren't I? Another present I want to give you guys, today's a good day. In the online learning system, if you scroll down, down, and you see we have a folder called math. And within the math folder is something called a math workbook. Now we'll talk about this first page in just a second. The rest of the math workbook gives you explanations of the math, and it gives you extra practice. What's one thing we know about math? Practice, practice, practice. So if you've been through the book, if you've been through the online learning system, when you're looking for extra math practice, here you go. And so here's tax calculations, what we did in Unit 3, for example, and it gives you a different explanation with some extra practice. Prorating on taxes, we're getting ready to get into that, into Unit 21. Here is area and volume calculations. So what we did in Unit 4, here's another explanation and some extra math on that. So it's a little workbook, and you can, do the whole thing, or you can do as little as much as you want, whichever piece you want practice on. But I do think this is good, especially as we're nearing the end of math. We only got like 3 more units where we do math. So we've been through most of it. We still got a little bit more to do. So if you see, like, for example, we haven't done the closing statement yet. We're going to do that Thursday. So if you guys get to this in the math workbook, if we haven't done it yet, don't worry about it. We'll get to it. Just know you have this extra practice here after we do it. Of course, we also have the solutions, each of the practice problems in the different sections, and it gives you the breakdown. But the real gift, I know, Julie, what kind of gift is extra math practice problems? But the real gift in the math workbook is the first page. And the first page tells you the math that you can expect to see when you go to PSI Testing Center. And then it gives you the math you can expect to see on my exam. So you guys can focus your study energy. You can focus your attention. And it gives you that nice breakdown, again, on what you see on my exam and what you can expect to see at PSI Testing Center. Remember, you guys, when you get to PSI Testing Center, it's a test bank of questions. So when you sit down, they do a random shuffle. So can I guarantee you're going to see a loan to value ratio on your state exam? No, but that random shuffle, there's a loan to value ratio problem in there. Does that make sense? I can't tell you. And they do that on purpose, by the way, and that's so I don't teach to the exam, right? So they say if we cover the syllabus, we've covered everything that you need to know for your exam. So we just give you this little breakdown here. Okay. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Just a couple quick things. I got my note. Did we talk the other day? I just want to make sure for when we were talking about your state exam, we were talking about the application process, da, da, da. I know we didn't talk about my end of class exam much because we said we'd talk about that at the end. But did I mention one thing I need you guys working on right now is securing a distraction-free zone for my test? Did we have this conversation? 0 distractions will be tolerated. So if you're in a noisy environment right now, you need to get that, you need to find a quiet place. And that's why I want to share this with you guys right now so you can start figuring out where you want to go take my end of class exam. You can't have anybody in the room with you. I can't see you having a conversation with others. So I just want to make sure that you're securing that. So we did that, so I can check that off. I had a interesting conversation this weekend with one of your peers, and she said something to me that really kind of struck a chord. She was a retake. She missed it by like 1 or 2 points last time. I mean, dang it, that's close. But, you know, retake is a retake, fail is a fail, right? And one thing she said to me the other day is that going through units 14 and 15 a second time really clicked. And now things make sense. She said, the first time I went through units 14 and 15, I had no idea what my instructor was talking about. Discount points were like, poof. And she said, now that I went through it a second time, I get it. She said, I sat there through 14 and 15. It was like clickety, 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 click. Light bulbs coming on all over the place. And what that did to me, well, it got me thinking. And what that meant to me is, you guys, please remember, we have our recordings on the YouTube channel. And one thing you may want to consider doing as you're getting ready for this final exam, you guys all got the report from your midterm, right? Do you know your areas of weakness? If you didn't do what you wanted to do on agency, for example, consider going back through the recordings and listening to agency again. Consider going back through the recordings and, you know, we all have the notes written down. But now if you go back through it a second time and you just listen, things may click. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Financing, I get financing is tough. It's a different language. It's a different vocabulary. But I do think there is power in hearing it again, seeing it again. And that's a huge benefit with those YouTube channels. So I just wanted to put that out there. Feedback from one of your peers. Hearing it twice sometimes helps. Comments on that? Questions?
Are we allowed to do the midterm again? Like not for a grade, but just for practice?
No, that was just a one-time deal, a one-shot deal. But you do have, you know, the online learning system that gives you the explanations. I think we talked last week, you could get some additional, like the Dearborn app and Exam Smart. So there are other questions out there, but the midterm, we were treating that like a real test. Did you guys find that report helpful? It broke it down for you, didn't it? By the way, the numbers in parentheses is the unit. So when it talks about agency relationships in parentheses, it says 7. If you bombed unit 7, if you bombed agency relationships, go to unit 7. Let's see, my exam has 112 questions and you get 4 hours. Sarah, shoot me an email and I can forward that to you. And I know there's concerns about time. So guys, your tests are timed and you need to get with Wayne on that, Jessica. And your tests are timed. And I highly recommend you guys start now working with a clock. When you're doing those quizzes at the end of each unit, set the timer on your phone. I would say about 2 minutes per question. And if you're blowing through it in 30 minutes and you fail, you know you have time to slow down. If you're not getting all the questions answered in allowed time, you got to pick it up a hair. But you do need, if you haven't already, you do need to start working with a clock. The last thing I want to say, we're getting ready to take a break, but the last thing I want to say, we're kind of on the downhill slope, right? We're getting ready to get into unit 21. We'll get into 17 on Thursday. And then if you guys look at the tentative schedule, you're going to see like a lot of units, but rest assured, there's like 3 units that when you look ahead, you're going to see they're like 20 pages. It's going to take us like an hour and a half to get through. You may see a question or two, right? So I guess this is just a reminder for me to tell you guys to trust the system. I don't want you to start worrying about time. Worrying about time is my job, and I'm not worried about time in the least little bit. So trust the system. This may or may not be your first time through pre-licensing, but I guarantee you it's not mine. So trust the system, know the way this class is set up. We will get through everything, absolutely. I think sometimes after contract, after financing, we tend to burn out a little bit, but you guys got to keep going. We got to keep going because we keep going. And we're not too far away from talking about your exam soon. So please, please, please keep it going. If you haven't started, this is a good time to start. Make sure you're devoting that time. And look at that midterm. Look at that report from your midterm, because that's going to help you know where to focus your energy. And when you pass my exam on March 9th, take that afternoon off, but then y'all got to keep studying, don't you? Please don't put that book down for months. You know where it all goes when you put it down for months? Like out there somewhere. I don't know where it is. So when we're done, you guys got to keep going. If your real estate license is something you really, really want, you'll do whatever it takes to get it. So I guess my rhetorical question to you is, how badly do you want this? Okay. Okay, let's take 10. We come back, we're going to go to unit 21. We get to go to closing, finally. So we'll go to closing. And we're back. Cameras are popping back on. I am taking attendance. We are ready to go to closing. So let's skip ahead in your book. Jump into unit 21. I'm on page 517. So we're going to get to closing. We got drowning in all of our closing paperwork, our closing documents. So specifically in unit 21, we're going to talk about some pre-closing procedures, things that have to happen before closing. We're going to talk about TRID and specifically RESPA a little bit more in this unit. And then we're going to do some math. And the math we're going to do is calculating a mini closing disclosure, a mini settlement statement. We call it mini because we're not doing a full-blown one. We don't need to figure out how much the buyer has to bring to closing, and we don't need to figure out how much the seller is going to get. For your test, you're going to have a question: how much does the buyer have to bring to closing? So we're just going to focus on the buyer's debits and the buyer's credits. We probably won't get to this math today, so we'll know where we'll start off on Thursday. We can start in with that. So let's talk about closing first. And when I'm working with buyers and sellers, but specifically when I'm working with buyers, I tell them to think about closing like working gears, the contract to closing process as working gears. And everybody that's involved in this contract to closing process is on a gear. So in other words, we're going to put the listing agent and the seller on a gear. We're going to put the buyer's agent, the buyer on a gear. The lender gets a gear. The appraiser gets a gear. The home inspector, the surveyor, the pest inspector, right? Everybody that has a role in this contract to closing process gets a gear. What happens if just one of these gears stops? The whole thing stops, doesn't it? Y'all want to know a big part of our job is keeping these gears going, keeping these gears moving, keeping that contract to closing process going, having our clients do what they're supposed to, particularly buyer's agents. You're going to be coordinating home inspection, pest inspection, communicating with the lender. A big part of our job is keeping these gears moving. We agreed to a settlement date when we formed the contract. Now we all need to work really, really hard to get settlement as close to that date as we can, understanding that delays just happen sometimes. So when we looked at our contract, we defined settlement versus closing. That verbiage from your contract is reprinted for you guys on page 518. You guys see the italicized on 518? That is direct from your contract. So we said that settlement is the time that buyers and sellers go to the attorney's office, sign their paperwork, sign their documentation. The buyer's bringing their funds. If the seller owes any money, they're going to bring their funds as well. And once we all leave the attorney's office, then the attorney proceeds with the process known as closing. And closing involves a number of events. Settlement, first off, we got to get buyers and sellers signatures and any monies. Satisfactory title update. We're going to revisit the title conversation in just a second. The closing attorney's receipt of the funds from the lender. So the lenders approve the loan, but now they got to send their money to the attorney so they can process it. And then the very last act of closing, the very last thing to happen is when the attorney records the buyer's new deed. The very last step is putting that new deed on record. And then and only then Is it a done deal? So let me go off textbook just for a minute. Some pre-closing procedures. The buyer hires the closing attorney, which means the closing attorney represents the buyer in this transaction. It is the closing attorney's responsibility for their buyer client to make sure what their buyer client is getting is a clear marketable title. Remember in unit 5, I think we talked about the title update. We talked about title insurance. We talked about title in unit 5. And the attorney's biggest responsibility to their buyer client is making sure that what they're being handed is this clear marketable title without any issues. All the kinks have been worked out. When the attorney is doing their title search, if they find any issues, if they find any kinks, the attorney on behalf of their buyer client will get with the seller to clear it up before settlement. If the buyer's getting a loan, they come with a lender, and the closing attorney also represents the best interest of the lender. And the best way that the closing attorney can represent the lender, as soon as they record the buyer's new deed, in the next breath, they record the lender's deed of trust. Remember lien priority? All liens are paid back in the order in which they're recorded, except for the mechanic's lien. Doesn't the lender want their deed of trust recorded first? I mean, a lot of times, new homeowners, you already have a brand new lien on your property before you've walked through the threshold of your new front door. So how the attorney can best represent the lender and attorney work together throughout the process, but the attorney will record the deed of trust on the lender's behalf. Buyer's agents, we go under contract. We get that thing negotiated and agreed, and we go under contract. Mini celebration. Once your buyer client has a copy of the contract, the next thing you're going to do, buyer's agents, is send that contract to the lender. The lending process is, without a doubt, the longest part of the contract to closing process. So get it to the lender. As soon as you do that, get a copy of the contract to the attorney so they can start doing their thing, doing the title search. And we want to go ahead and schedule settlement with the attorney. Understanding delays may happen. Attorneys are just as used to that as we are, so they're flexible. They allow for change. But we've all agreed to a settlement date. We're all going to work towards that date. So let's go ahead and get it scheduled. Let's go ahead and get on the attorney's books. Typically, in a typical residential transaction, most of the time, sellers will allow the buyer's closing attorney to prepare their documents to get them ready what they need to do to get through settlement. However, keep in mind, sellers are always welcome to hire their own representation. So if the seller wants to bring their own attorney to the transaction, they are absolutely welcome to do that. If it's a commercial transaction, both parties are going to be represented. If it's an estate, for example, the seller probably already comes with an attorney. So you may have situations. But even in that typical residential transaction, if the seller wants to bring their own attorney, by all means, anybody is always welcome to have their own representation in any situation in or outside of real estate. So I hear you guys. No pun intended, but what's the $1 million question? Julie, when do I get paid? We've been through this. That deed's recorded. When do I get my money? We don't get paid until it closes, which means you're not going to get your commission check when you are with your clients at settlement. You will get your check after the deed has recorded. And all attorneys are different. Some do batches a couple times a day. Some record once a day. I had an attorney in Greensboro once, they had my buyer sign. And the attorney looked at us and he said, you got about 10, 15 minutes to spare? And we were like, we do. And he said, y'all want a bottle of water? So that's really nice. So my buyers and I hung out for about 15 minutes. And he came back in with my check and their keys. So that particular attorney chose to do it right then and there. What I need you guys to know is that they're all different. And the best way to know is just to ask when you're getting used to these different attorneys. If they're not going to record right there while you're sitting there, once settlement is done, once your clients have signed, we're going to get up and we're going to leave. And later that day, you're going to get an email from the attorney or the paralegal. And that email is my absolute favorite email in this industry. And that email is small, it's short, it's to the point. That email says, we are on record. That tells us it's a done deal. Loosely translated, do a big U-turn in the middle of the road, go back to the attorney's office and get your check. Well, get your firm's check. Not your check, your firm's check. We are on record means that it's a done deal, and that's when you get paid. By the way, my second favorite email in this industry is also short and sweet and to the point. And it's from the lender a couple of days before closing. And it says, clear to close. That's the last piece I need, the lender's approval. Now we can get to closing, where we get that email that says we are on record. So backing up just a bit, let's backtrack. We've talked about your buyer's due diligence process. Again, the italicized on page 519 and 520 is directly from your offer to purchase and contract. And we learned that the buyer's due diligence process is their opportunity to investigate the property, learn everything that they possibly can know about it, to decide whether they will proceed with or terminate the transaction. That's the whole point of the due diligence period. The buyer has the ability to terminate at any time during due diligence for any reason or no reason at all. If they terminate within due diligence, the seller keeps the due diligence fee. That's what the buyer paid for. And the buyer gets their earnest money deposit back. So the contract doesn't just define the due diligence process. The contract also gives specifics. What things should the buyer be encouraged to inspect and investigate so they can learn about the property, so they can decide if they want to move forward with or terminate this transaction. And starting on page 520, we got some of those specifics, again, pulled straight from your contract. Now, we've talked about most of these, so we're going to go through these pretty quickly. This is a good review. If your buyer's getting a loan, we have got to get them going on that loan process. Again, you guys, the loan process is the longest part of the contract to closing process. So as soon as we get under contract, get a buyer's agents, get a copy of that contract to the lender right away so they can start on their process. As we talked about in our financing units, the lenders are going to be in touch with the buyers. They're going to need documentation. They're going to need information. One way we can keep those gears turning, those gears moving, is to have a conversation with your buyers and tell your buyers that the lender is their priority. Tell your buyers that if the lender is requesting a document, get it to them. I don't know why they're requesting it, but for some reason they need it. If they didn't, they wouldn't ask for it, right? So have this conversation with your buyer. Tell them to make the lender priority so they can get the appraisal ordered. We can get that back, and we can get this loan through the first round of underwriting, all while we're still in due diligence. Would it surprise you guys if I told you there are buyers that have delayed their own closing because they won't respond quickly to the lender? This is a big piece where we can help keeping those gears turning. And I do want to point out, because some of you, If you haven't bought a home in the last 15 years, then close your ears for a second. But if you bought a home 15 years ago or more, you very well may have had a loan contingency in the contract. And the other thing we're reminded on page 520 is that loan contingencies no longer exist. Can the parties agree to add a contingency? Of course they can. They can agree to just about anything. But there isn't an automatic loan contingency. So in other words, if we find out after due diligence that the buyer's not going to get loan approval, we'll have to terminate. And after due diligence, the buyer's now in breach. Seller will keep the due diligence fee. And now the seller's going to get the earnest money deposit. So the sooner we can get going on this loan process, the better. The more answers we have while we're still in due diligence, the better. As we've said, the whole reason of the due diligence period is for the buyer to investigate the property. We want them early on to have a home inspection. The home inspector comes in and they point out problems with the home. This is broke, this isn't working. The home inspector is not going to go in and tell your buyer what a lovely home they're buying. The home inspector's job is to go in there and find problems. Isn't that what your buyer's investigating and inspecting? They're looking for the problems. So they hire this home inspector. The home inspector is, if they see an issue, for example, with the electrical, they're going to recommend that the buyer talk to an electrician. If they have a problem with plumbing, they're going to recommend that the buyer talk to a plumber. A home inspector is not there to diagnose. A home inspector is there to say, this is broke, this isn't working, this needs fixed. Other investigations, we'll talk about the pest inspection in just a second. If it's in an HOA, we want to help your buyer get their hands, if they haven't already, on covenants, on the bylaws, and any documents available through the HOA. Maybe the seller provided them. If not, they're public records, which means we can help our buyer by doing a search on the public records and finding those documents. If the buyer's getting a loan, if the buyer's going through a lender, homeowner's insurance is required, period, end of story. If it's a cash buyer, homeowner's insurance is highly recommended. So the only buyer that's required to get homeowner's insurance is those that are getting a loan. We're going to talk about insurance, homeowner's insurance in Unit 13. We've mentioned the appraisal. The appraisal is the property of the lender. The lender requires the appraisal. They let the buyer pay for it, but they require the appraisal so they know how much loan to issue. Remember our loan to value ratio? And the lender defines value as the sales price or the appraised amount, whichever one is less. So the lender requires the appraisal to get that idea, to get that opinion from the appraiser. As soon as we finish up Unit 21, we're jumping into our appraiser's unit. Unit 17 is all about the appraisal, so we'll talk more about that. Surveys, we talked about in Unit 4. Buyer may choose to have a survey. Very rarely the lender may require it, but most of the times it's buyer's option. That helps them identify the property line so they know if they're dealing with any easements or encroachments. If there's any title issues that come up after closing and they waived the survey, title insurance may not protect the new owner. Title insurance very well may say, had you gotten a survey done before closing, we would have discovered this issue and taken care of. But because you chose not to, we're not going to cover you. So having that conversation with your buyers about the importance of a survey. If it's raw land, or if there is currently an on-site septic system, we may want to consider having a septic system inspection. If it's raw land, they want to do what's known as a PERC test, P-E-R-C, PERC test. And that tests the soil to see how well it will support an on-site septic system. They're looking for a location. You want the septic system above or below the house. You don't want the septic system to run into the house because, ooh. So we want location, how well the soil just absorbs water. If there's already one installed, they may want to consider having that tested as well. Anybody remember how many human heartbeats per bedroom the septic report, the septic permit gives us? Yep. So 2 human heartbeats. I say human because our 4-legged family members don't count. So 2 2-legged family member heartbeats. So the septic permit will tell us how many bedrooms were allowed based on the number of occupants. Then there's the wood destroying insect report. We refer to this as the pest inspection, but specifically the wood destroying insect report, the pest inspection is not looking for all pests. They are just looking for the ones that destroy wood. Termites, carpenter bees, powder post beetles, those little suckers can do some damage. And when the pest inspector's in there, they're looking for evidence of wood destroying insects. Now, if your home inspector sees evidence of other pests, they will make a note of that. Droppings, nests, that kind of thing. But specifically, what the pest inspector is looking for is wood destroying, evidence of wood destroying insect. There's a sample in your book on 522. And this is an actual pest inspection. 522. And you can see about halfway down under number 3, they're looking for visible evidence of. So for example, termites. Termites create termite tunnels. And tunnels allow the termites to get from the earth up to the wood. So they may find termite tunnels over like the brick foundation, for example. Maybe they're active, meaning you can actually see the little buggers crawling in those tunnels. I've seen that once. I hope I never, ever see it again. It was like the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But they're not necessarily looking for activity. They're just looking for those tunnels. That tunnels tell them at one point in time, there were termites. Remember, if your buyer's getting a VA loan, the pest inspection is required. Otherwise, it's up to the buyer's option. Also during the due diligence process is to ask for repairs, negotiate any repairs. Does the seller have to repair anything? No. Remember that one very important sentence in our contract that says this property is being sold in its current condition, which does not obligate the seller to fix anything. However, there's no rule that says the buyer can't ask. The buyer can always ask for repairs. The worst the seller can do is say no. They can't terminate the contract because the buyer asked. So the worst they can do is say no. If they agree to do the requested repairs or even some of the requested repairs, as a buyer's agent, be sure to say thank you, understanding that they are under no obligation to fix anything. If the seller's gonna do repairs, we need to have those agreed on in writing and signed by the end of our due diligence period. That buyer needs the commitment from the seller to decide, now knowing what I know, do I want to move forward with or terminate the transaction? So we need to have those negotiations agreed on, completed, in writing and signed while we are still in due diligence. During the due diligence process is that buyer's right to terminate. They can terminate for any reason or no reason up to 5 p.m. on the agreed upon due diligence date. They're not in breach until after due diligence. During due diligence, what they have is that right to terminate. That's what they pay the due diligence fee for. So if they exercise their right to terminate, they just have to provide written notice to the seller. They don't have to tell the seller why they're terminating. They can if they want to, but they don't have to tell the seller why. They just have to provide written notice by 5 p.m. on their due diligence date. 5:01, they're in breach, and now they're losing their earnest money. And then physical inspections of the property. Buyers should be encouraged to go into the property, go to the property several times during the contract to closing process. Obviously, with their agent, they just can't show up unannounced to have this conversation with your buyers. But they should be encouraged, for example, to meet the home inspector after they've done their inspection to discuss the findings with the home inspector. Maybe they want to show the home to mom and dad. Maybe they want to bring paint samples so they can figure out what color they're going to paint this room. Buyers should be seeing this home several times while we're under contract. Every time they see it, their rose-colored glasses come off a little bit more and a little bit more. And every time they see it, they see things that they didn't see the time before, or the time before that, or the time before that. I encourage my buyers to drive by the property several different times of the day. What does it look like at 6 o'clock in the morning? What does it look like at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night? I encourage my buyers to do drive-bys. Again, they can't go to the property, in the property without me, and I got a schedule with the seller. It is still the seller's home. So we can't just show up and walk in the front door, but they should be encouraged. And probably one of the biggest physical inspections that the buyer can do is the final walkthrough. The final walkthrough happens as close to settlement as we possibly can. I try to do the final walkthrough on my way to the attorney's office. Because remember, what the buyer's signing is that they accept the property in its then current condition. And to be fair to our buyers, they need to know what that then current condition is. So we're doing the final walkthrough. If the buyers aren't satisfied with something in the home, we're on our way to the attorney's office anyway, right? We know we're going to see probably the seller and the listing agent. Tell your buyer we're not going to sign anything until we get this resolved, until we get this taken care of. And if the parties agree to something else, maybe the seller says, oh yeah, I'll go back and clean that up. Instead of taking the seller's word at it, at this point, we're sitting in front of an attorney. So can't they draft us up a document real quick? Don't tell your buyers to sign and then deal with it later. Guys, this isn't Amazon Prime. They don't have like a 60-day return policy. Once they sign and that new deed gets recorded, it's a done deal. So make sure we're doing that final walkthrough so they know what they're signing, what they're agreeing to. And then there's other things that the buyer may want to have considered, inspected, or investigated. Do they want to have the property tested for radon? If it was built prior to 1978, do they want to have the lead-based paint tested prior to 17.8? Do they want to look into asbestos? Are there issues with mold? Is it on a well? If so, they may want to consider having a well water test And then the streets, if they're public or private. How are they maintained if they're private? Is it money that comes out of an HOA, monthly HOA, or do they do special assessment every time we get a pothole? Help them gather that information. This is what I want you guys to understand. The buyer's due diligence process, page 520 to 523, is not an inclusive list, which means there may be things that your buyer wants to have inspected or investigated that's not on this list. And in that case, our answer is, okie doke, let's do it. Because remember, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. Never look at your buyer and say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. I wouldn't worry about that. If it's important to them, who's the one buying this house? So if it's important to them, our job as their agent is to help them get it inspected or get it investigated. I've had several agents, I've not had this personal experience, but I've had several agents over my years say, while we're under contract, the buyer wants to schedule time to bring the priest over. They want the priest to walk in the front door. Tell us about the vibes, the energy in the home. Is it good energy? Is it bad energy? Despite your beliefs on that, don't ever look at your buyer and say, it doesn't matter what the priest says. If it's important to them, then you say, when would be a good time for you and the priest to meet me at the house so we can go in and look at the energy? Everybody with me? I've heard some crazy things, but guess what? I'm not the one buying this house. I'd hate for somebody to come back afterwards, court of law, because their house was haunted. And I didn't let the priest come over. That could be an interesting court case, couldn't it? Like poltergeist or something. Questions on the buyer's piece of the due diligence? Obviously, they're the ones with all the work to do, most of the work to do during due diligence. The seller doesn't have as much to do during due diligence. They don't have as many things to worry about. Their biggest thing to worry about is, can the buyer get the loan? Can they secure that financing? As a buyer's agent, I think it's helpful to keep the listing agent updated throughout the process, let everybody know where we are. So when you get an update from the lender, I think the seller would want to know where we are, know that update. So absolutely, they care about securing the buyer, securing financing. The other thing that the seller cares about is making sure their numbers are accurate, making sure their numbers are right on the settlement statement. Hopefully, and in most cases, your seller is going to get money after closing. And as their listing agent, we need to help them verify that that money is right. And that's pointing us in the direction of the closing disclosure. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. One thing settlement and closing are known for is all the paperwork. There's lots and lots of paperwork. Now, I didn't recreate the wheel. The seller's documents are at the bottom of page 524. One document that the seller is responsible for is the deed. Now, the attorney will prepare that for them. The attorney will get it ready for the soon-to-be new owner to sign. If the seller gets their own attorney, their own representation, then that attorney will provide it for them. Bill of sale of personal property. If we agree to anything outside of the contract, then we'll want to do a bill of sale. For example, I cannot tell you how many times I've shown a home and we walked in the garage and the buyer goes, ooh, does the car come with the house? In which case I always say, anything's negotiable. Money talks, doesn't it? What you want to offer me for my car, we'll talk. So if they agree to personal property outside of the purchase, it's not included in the purchase price, then we have a bill of sale. Leases and related documents. If there's currently a tenant in place, the buyer's going to buy honoring the existing lease, which means the buyer has the right to be provided with, like, the lease and where the tenant is on their payment. Are they current? Are they up to date? Are they behind or delinquent? The buyer's acquiring the seller's tenant. So all that documentation needs to happen. Seller's payoff figures. The seller's lender will determine to the penny what the seller needs for that day to pay off their loan. The attorney has to pay off and record a release of the seller's outstanding liens before they can record the buyer's new deed. All that in closing has to happen in a certain order, and the timeline of it has to add up. So the seller and the attorney are going to communicate with the seller's lender to get the exact amount to the penny, what the seller owes, any outstanding liens. And then the seller's going to be asked to sign an affidavit saying, I haven't had any repairs done in the last 120 days. And if I have, they've been paid for in full. They're going to sign a sworn statement saying that there's no mechanic after closing that can come and file a lien on the property to collect. Seller's documents, there's not that many. Takes them about 15-20 minutes to sign. Who gets all the paperwork? A buyer. Y'all bought a home in the last 10-12 years? Attorney came out, stack of paperwork this thick, isn't it? Attorney came out, kind of set it down, this little poof of dust. I always tell my buyers to get their signing hand warmed up, because you know what they're doing for about 45 to 50 minutes? Sign, 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 sign. Buyer's documents are top of page 525. The biggest part of the closing document is the loan package. Again, if it's a cash buyer, all that paperwork goes away. So the loan package, the lender sends the attorney their loan package. The lender tells the attorney how they want their loan package handled. So the lender communicates directly with the attorney to get them those documents and to include any instructions on how the lender may want their paperwork, their closing paperwork handled. Tell your buyers, throughout this entire process, on our way to settlement, buyers have probably been e-signing documents. When they get to settlement, the lender's going to want to require a wet signature. They figure, all right, we're sitting here in front of an attorney now. Let's get a pen to paper signature. So some of these documents are things that they've already e-signed, things that they've already seen. It's all part of the lender's process. Tell your buyer, if you want the money from the lender, we're going to follow the lender's instructions in making sure their paperwork is complete and accurate. Other buyer's documents, there's their new title insurance policy. One of the steps of closing is the attorney to notify the title insurance company about their opinion of title. The attorney tells the title insurance company, I've done my research, everything looks good. I think you can release title insurance. Property insurance information. Again, we're securing that during due diligence, but the lender wants verification that a policy is in place. Wood destroying or pest inspection report, only required for a VA loan. And then the survey, if the buyer has one done. So the way this usually works Hang on to that. I'm sorry, we'll talk about that in a minute. I got ahead of myself. Questions just on the documentation, the paperwork. We mentioned the title procedures. This is the attorney's job. This is a good recap of Unit 5 real quick. So we go under contract, we send the contract to the attorney, we go ahead and schedule settlement. At that time, the attorney is going to do a preliminary title search. They're going to go through all of the public records. And if they find any defects on the title, the attorney, on behalf of their buyer client, is going to get with the seller to get those defects corrected, get whatever taken care of. Any unknown outstanding liens, for example, that the seller didn't know. Once we all leave settlement, then the attorney offers, they're going to do another quick title search. And upon their satisfaction, they're going to offer a title opinion, final opinion, to the title insurance company. And then and only then will the title insurance company release title insurance to the new owner. Today, they're the buyer. Tomorrow, they're the owner of record. And title insurance is always meant to cover the existing owner. So the buyer's policy isn't going to kick in until that deed is recorded, until they officially become the owner of record. And the affidavit that the seller signs is actually by request by the title insurance company. So the attorney's done their search, they've offered their final opinion. They have the seller sign an affidavit saying, everything you found is all I know about. Nobody can come forward and lay claim to this property. I swear, I promise. And if something happens later that affects the title insurance will probably go after the seller first, the former owner first, because they signed something saying this wasn't going to happen. And if the former owner is broke or dead or MIA, then title insurance will probably cover it on behalf of the new owner. Questions? All right, let's talk about closing, specifically settlement. There are two methods of closing. The first method is referred to as an escrow closing. We do not do this in North Carolina. An escrow closing tends to use a title insurance company. Attorneys don't get involved in escrow closing states unless they need to be. The parties don't attend closing. They have nothing to attend. They just drop their paperwork off. And states that do an escrow type settlement have a relation back doctrine that says it considers happens when you deliver the paperwork. So the deed is considered when the seller drops it off and the escrow agent does their thing. Again, the escrow agent in other states, closing is generally handled by a title insurance company. Anybody ever bought a home in another state? No. So other states, and I don't know what other states, but other states may use an escrow closing. What we do here in North Carolina is referred to as a settlement meeting method, which means we use a settlement agent, also known as a closing attorney. They're the ones that handle the closing, the process. They put the finishing touches on things. They record that new deed. When you sell a property, it should be reported to the IRS. So the closing attorney will generally send something to the IRS on behalf of the seller, just to make sure it gets there. We don't forget. Agents, tell your buyers and sellers the year that they're buying or selling this home. They want to talk to their accountant. Make sure they're taking advantage of all the tax breaks they can get from buying and or selling. And then the lender's interest in closing, the biggest thing the lender cares about is that their deed of trust gets recorded. So as soon as they record the buyer's new deed, in the very next breath, they record the lender's deed of trust. Again, the attorney is working directly with the lender to make sure that the loan package is handled to the lender's satisfaction. We go to settlement. The buyer signs the loan package. Part of the closing process, the attorney takes that loan package, sends it to the lender, and upon approval, that's when the lender releases their funds. So the lender won't release the loan amount until they have that satisfactory loan package. So why are the different closing methods important? I've recently learned that North Carolina, settlement meeting state, we are one of few. I think there's only about 6 or 7 states that do a settlement meeting state, which means the majority do the escrow, which means you very well may have a buyer moving here from another state that is used to the escrow closing method. And that buyer at some point will look at you and say, do I have to hire an attorney? And our answer is, if you're buying a home that's located in the state of North Carolina, yes, because we are a settlement method meeting state. Page 526 just kind of gives you a quick breakdown of who typically attends settlement. We always need the buyer there. Well, almost always need the buyer there. The buyer's the one signing all that paperwork. We may be able to, the lender and the attorney may agree to do what's known as a mail away closing if it's an extreme situation and they have time. But typically, the buyer's going to attend settlement. Buyer's agents, go with your buyer. Make sure we see this thing out through the end. We've been with them since day one, haven't we? So why in the world are we not going to go with them to settlement? If there's any questions about the contract that comes up, you're available to answer. If nothing else, you're a reassurance. You're the familiar face that they know and recognize. Anybody ever bought a home? Maybe you don't own one right now, but you ever bought a home? It is a nerve-wracking experience. Yes? And at some point you're going, oh my God, what am I doing? 30-year commitment to the lender. Having that comforting face of your agent, having that support is huge for our buyers. I remember when I bought my little condo in 2006, I woke up that morning and I thought, what am I doing? And I got to the attorney's office and I got out of my car and I swear my knees turned to jello. It was the darndest thing I'd ever, and I thought, what in the world am I doing? And about that time of me almost having a little mini freak out in the parking lot, here comes my attorney. Hey, or not my attorney, my agent. Hey, Julie, you ready to do this? And I totally attribute her to getting me on that elevator, getting me across the parking lot on the elevator. I don't know that I could have done it on my own. I might have still been standing out in the parking lot. It's a big deal to buy a house. So buyer's agents, please go with your buyers. The commission would consider that an old car act as well. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Sellers may or may not attend settlement. Sellers have choices. They can either attend settlement, sign all their paperwork, leave the keys, or they can choose to attend to sign their paperwork prior to settlement. They have to do so in front of a notary, but they can choose to sign their paperwork prior to settlement, and the listing agent can deliver the paperwork and the keys on their behalf. It's been my experience, sellers go one of two ways. Either they want to see this thing to the very end and go to the closing attorney's office, or they are so done, they want to sign their paperwork and just be done. So leave it up to your sellers. Obviously, both agents, again, you're going to be with your buyers, buyer's agents, seller's agents. You still want to be there in case something comes up, questions or issues come up at the settlement table. There's a representative of your seller, even if they're not there. The party's attorneys, buyer's attorney is going to be the one conducting the settlement. If the seller has their own representation, their attorney may want to come as well. If you're using a local lender, the lender may come to settlement as well. Again, just be on hand to answer any questions that might come up, last minute questions that come up about the loan. And then very rarely, you may have a member of the title insurance company. Since we're a settlement meeting state though, usually the title insurance company lets the attorney handle everything. Typically the way this happens, if the sellers attend settlement, we no longer allow buyers and sellers in the same room at the same time when we're signing paperwork. So usually what the attorney will do is come out and get the seller, take them back to the little room to sign their paperwork. We're talking like 15, 20 minutes. Let the seller go home or go wherever they're going. I guess they're not going home at this point. Go wherever they're going. And then the attorney will come back and get the buyer, take them back to the little room. That's going to be about a 45-minute process. Congratulations, guys. We just closed this thing. We are on record. That's when you have the big celebration. No more mini celebration. Once you get the we are on record, it is a done deal. Questions or comments? Okay. All right, let's say 10. Come back, we're going to talk about RESPA. We're back. How we doing? Good? So I'm going to take attendance. And we're going to talk a little bit more about, well, we're going to talk about RESPA. So first off, as a quick reminder, we introduced this idea to you when we first introduced you to TRID. And TRID is the combination of TILA and RESPA. So TILA's always been around, RESPA's always been around. TRID combines the two, TILA, RESPA, integrated disclosure. One of the complaints from consumers was that there's paperwork required for TILA and there's paperwork required for RESPA. And a common complaint was that TILA's paperwork looked very similar to RESPA's paperwork. And consumers in some cases thought they were signing the same thing twice. Why am I signing this again? Well, one's for TILA and one's for RESPA. So the big thing that Dodd-Frank did was combine the two. They consolidated the two. And that's why we have TRID today. So they consolidated some of that paperwork in attempts to be less confusing. So why don't you guys remind me in a private chat? Earlier today, we said TILA was also known as regulation what? TILA is also known as regulation what? So TILA is also known as regulation TILA is also known as regulation Z. Everybody have that? TILA equals regulation Z. Way too easy to ask you about TILA. A lot more fun to ask you about regulation Z. So if TILA, gotcha. If TILA is also known as regulation Z, RESPA is also known as regulation X. I would know. TILA is regulation Z. RESPA is regulation X. These look like great candidates for flashcards, if you ask me. TILA is Z, RESPA is X. RESPA is meant to protect the consumers. Again, it's all about consumer protection, trying to weed out some of those shady or fraudulent lenders. It's also enforced by the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. RESPA kicks in on residential loans when the borrower is purchasing a property that's 1 to 4 dwellings. So it could be a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex. 1 to 4 dwellings, residential loans. Remember, if it's a cash buyer, TRID, thus RESPA, are not around. If it's a commercial loan, TRID, thus RESPA, are not around. They're only here in residential loans. All the loans we talked about, conventional, FHA, VA, they all fall under RESPA and Regulation X. And the big thing that RESPA does is it requires accurate accounting of funds. It helps the consumer better understand their costs to close. Again, when you see RESPA, it's the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. See the word settlement. RESPA tells the consumer the cost to close. So RESPA for the lender starts to kick in when the lender has received the loan application. And the loan application consists of 6 pieces. Once the lender gets, and this is all on page 530, once the lender gets certain information about the borrower and certain information about the property, specifically the borrower's name, gross income, social security number, the property's address, estimate of property value, and the loan amount. Those 6 pieces together is the official loan application, and that starts a trigger for the lender. The first understanding, and I think we talked about this in our financing units, but there's only so far we can go in the loan application process until we have the property, right? We could get the buyer, the borrower through some of it, but until we get the property, until we get a signed contract, we don't have the rest of it. So the lender can only do so much until they get the rest of the story, the contract story. And RESPA has some requirements on the lender. They say within 3 days of loan application, the lender needs to send the borrower a know before you owe booklet. This goes through the process of buying a home, encourages the buyer to shop around for services, like, for example, the home inspector. And also within 3 days of loan application, the lender is required to send the borrower a loan estimate. I'll share with you guys, my husband and I bought this house almost 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years in August. And it was really interesting for me to go through it as a buyer. Obviously, I got to be my own buyer's agent. I'm not letting somebody else get paid a commission on the purchase of my home, right? So I got to wear 2 hats in that transaction. I got to be a buyer's agent, but I also got to be the buyer. And it was really interesting. It was really beneficial for me to see it through that end. And for example, what my lender did to get me my know before you owe booklet and my loan estimate, they had like a little software program set up that I could access my records. It's kind of like from your doctor. Your doctor won't send you an email telling you what's wrong. Your doctor will send you an email saying there's information in your account, you need to log in and check it out, right? So they're not sending secure information via email, but they are sending you notification that something there. And that's what we got, this know before you owe booklet and this loan estimate. That software from the lender allows them to see stuff like, when did the borrower access the documents? When did they log on? When did they see it? And they are going to have to sign acknowledging receipt as well. So RESPA requires know before you owe and the loan estimate. Please understand, the loan estimate is just that. We just went under contract 3 days ago. Yes, just got this loan application, this loan information to the lender. And so now what they're doing is providing estimates. This is not the final. This is not an end all be all. This is to help give the buyer, the borrower, an idea of what their numbers are going to look at within 3 days of the loan application. Remember when we started class and I said there were times that buyers weren't seeing their numbers until they were sitting at the settlement meeting table? Trid said, that's got to stop. We need to show them, in this case, within 3 days of loan application. Because this is an estimate, some things can change between now and closing. And the different tolerance for change depends on what it is. So for example, one thing that absolutely cannot change is the lender charges. What the lender quotes their charges to the borrowers, they are locked in, that amount cannot change. There's no tolerance for change. Keep in mind, the loan origination fee is a percentage of the loan amount. So if the loan amount changes, then the lender's charge is going to change. What can't change is that percentage. Once they say it's a 1% loan origination fee, for example, they're locked in. There can be a 10% tolerance up or down, 10% change. These are things in which the lender provides services, costs that the lender provides services. So for example, the appraisal. The lender requires the appraisal. They let the buyer pay for it, but they require the appraisal. So we're putting that loan estimate out. That tolerance, that change can be 10% either way. And then an unlimited tolerance or fees out of the lender's control. These are services that the lender doesn't require, but that the buyer may choose to do during their due diligence. So for example, the home inspection, pest inspection, if it's not a VA loan, radon test, lead-based paint test. We have an idea, we can get an estimate, but until we actually hire the home inspector, we don't know how much it's going to be. It's kind of been my experience that lenders overestimate a lot of these charges. That means the buyer has less than thought than they needed to bring to closing. Anytime those numbers go down, it's okay. The problem is when those numbers go up from the estimate. So let's look together in your book, page 535. We have a sample loan estimate, then 3 days of loan application. So there's our applicant's name, the property, the purchase price. It's a 30-year conventional loan. It's already, the rate lock's already been, or the rate has already been locked in. Then we have the loan amount, interest rate. There's your estimated monthly principal and interest payment. Is there a prepayment penalty? Yes or no? Is there a balloon payment? Yes or no? Then come down a little bit more. We're going to estimate taxes. We probably know taxes. We're also going to estimate insurance. We don't know insurance yet because we don't know who the borrower is going to choose. Are they going to go State Farm? Are they going to go Geico? That's why we want them to shop around. But what we can get from our estimate, estimating taxes and insurance, there's your estimated total monthly payment. Within 3 days of loan application, the borrower is going to know that their estimated monthly payment is $1,050. That gives them time to consider that number. That gives them time to think about, make sure that they're good with that they're comfortable swinging that every month. Come down a little bit more, the very last line there. Within 3 days of loan application, the borrower now knows their estimated cash to close is $16,054. How much does the buyer have to bring to settlement when we go to the attorney's office? It's going to be estimated at $16,054. Would you guys rather know this stuff 3 days after going under contract or like the day before settlement? Is that, I mean, it just makes me nervous to think about it. Y'all get a little heart, get a little fluttery just thinking about. So the loan estimate gives the borrowers these numbers early. Look over to page 536. Not only do we tell the borrower, when you go to settlement, you're going to have to bring $16,054. What we're doing on 536 is breaking down how we got that amount. We just didn't pull the $16,054 out of thin air. These are all the charges that that equate to that $16,054. So again, the lender just doesn't give them a number. They say, here you go. If you were, don't do it now, wait till after class. But if you were to whip out your calculator and add all those numbers, you should hopefully get $16,054. So it gives them the breakdown. 537 is just more information, additional information about the loan. So again, they have their little software program. They send the borrower an email that says there's a document waiting your review. They're logging in to their little account and they're seeing these loan estimate in their know before you owe booklet. Questions on the loan estimate? So now let's fast forward. We've gotten through the loan application. Within 3 days of loan application, we got the loan estimate. Now let's fast forward to settlement. And as we're getting closer and closer to settlement, each buyer and seller are going to be issued a closing disclosure. There are 2 CDs, 2 closing disclosures. One is for the seller. Another big thing that TRID did was separate the buyers and sellers. It used to be that one document contained all the buyers' numbers and all the sellers' numbers. Sellers could see buyers' numbers, buyers could see sellers' numbers. TRID said, yeah, we need to keep these confidential. The parties don't need to share this information. So today we're required to see 2 closing disclosures. Let's all understand this. The consumer in this transaction, the consumer that TRID is protecting in this transaction is the buyer, because they are the ones that are originating a new loan. The seller is not the consumer in this transaction. Yes, they do get a closing disclosure, but it does not come from the buyer's lender. The buyer's lender and the seller don't have any communication. The seller will get a closing disclosure from the closing attorney. And that closing disclosure breaks down all the seller's debits and credits. And it tells them, bottom line, how much they can expect to get. Again, sellers are not covered under TRID because sellers are not originating the loan. So the seller has a CD, but it's not from the buyer's lender. Buyer's lender does not care about the seller. This comes from the closing attorney. And this usually happens the day or 2 before settlement. Your seller's not going to see their CD. You're not going to see your seller's CD until like the day of, the day before, depending on the attorney. They're the ones that are preparing it. The other closing disclosure is for the borrower. And this is where TRID steps in. This is where TRID kicks in and gives us some rules. The borrower must receive their closing disclosure no later than 3 days prior to settlement. Another big place where you and I can help keep those gears turning. The week of settlement, you're going to look at your buyer and say, you are going to get a very important email from your lender. It's going to tell you that your closing disclosure is ready for review. It's going to require you to log in and sign acknowledging receipt. We have to have the borrower's acknowledgement of receipt, the buyers receive it within 3 days of settlement. Sundays, national holidays don't count, Saturdays do. How we count days in contract world? Day 1 is always the day after receipt. So today's Tuesday. So if your buyer receives their closing disclosure today, day 1 is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What I'm telling you is if your buyer doesn't receive the closing disclosure today, we cannot close on Friday. We have to allow 3 days. Mark my words. You will have a closing delayed because of this rule right here. And there's nothing you and I can do about it. There's nothing the lender can do about it. There's nothing the attorney can do about it. Personal delivery means either physically handing it to them or sending it through that little software where the lender can see this is the date and time they opened it. This is the date and time. If you just want to email it to them or snail mail it to them, then we have to allow for 6 days. Again, Saturday or Sundays and national holidays don't count. So we always have to have 3 days, day 1 being the day after receipt. This gives the borrower time to look at their final numbers. We gave them a loan estimate, we gave them a rough idea, but now we need to give them a time to look at their final numbers. And those 3 days gives them the opportunity to ask some questions, make sure they're good. As with the loan estimate, sometimes things change once the closing disclosure has been delivered to the borrower. Once the lender sends the closing disclosure to the borrower, sometimes things change. One thing you and I are going to talk about on Thursday is our duty to review these things for accuracy. And we may find an error. When we do, we got to report that. We got to notify the lender and the attorney of the error. They will issue new closing disclosure. Just because we have a change doesn't necessarily mean that we need a new 3-day count. There are only a few changes that require a new CD and a new 3-day count. So if any of those changes, if the APR increases, the lender has to issue a new CD and we have to allow for a new 3-day count. If a prepayment penalty is added, it's going to require a new 3-day count. And if the basic loan product changes, if for some reason prior to settlement, the buyer decides to switch from an FHA loan to a conventional loan, we issue a new, or the lender issues a new CD and they require a new 3-day count. No other change requires a new 3-day count. These are the only changes. They all require a new CD. But these are the only changes that require a new 3-day count. So now look with me on page 540. And we can actually, when you want to, when you're looking at this stuff after class, we can actually compare the numbers from the loan estimate on 535 to our final closing disclosure on 540. They're two of the same, towards the same borrower. So again, we have the contact information, the loan amount. There's our loan amount again, interest rate. There's our monthly principal and interest. Come down just a bit. Now we know specifics about mortgage insurance, PMI, estimated escrow. Now we know for sure. The loan estimate says that your monthly payment was going to be $1,050. Now we know for sure it's $1,050.26. I don't think there's anybody that's going to get excited over 26 cents. But this is why the buyer has to receive this, review this information. Then come down to the bottom there. You guys remember the loan estimate? Your buyer was told they had to bring $16,054. That's what the estimate told them. But now that we're on our way to settlement, now your buyer only has to bring $14,147.26. Isn't that good news for your buyer? You thought you were going to have to bring $16,000, but now you only got to bring $14,000 plus. Anytime those numbers come down, it's okay. This is good news to your buyer. They now got a couple $1,000s laying around that they can use towards, moving expenses, painting, bottle of champagne, whatever. Breakdown of closing costs, again, on 541 and over onto 542. I just have 541 and 542 here for you guys as a reference, because this is an idea of what you can expect to see on the closing disclosure. We're going to do our mini closing disclosure math off of 561 and 541 and 542. When you guys get to post licensing, you get to do a full-blown settlement statement, which means when you get to post licensing, you will be doing 541 and 542. We're just easing you in. Look with me. I love the top of page 542. I think this is one of the most beneficial things for your buyers. There's a nice side-by-side comparison from the loan estimate to the final, and very simple. Did this change? Yes or no? You guys seeing this? This is what I told you in the loan estimate. Now that we're at closing, this is where we actually are. Did it change? 542, buyers on the left, sellers on the right, breakdown of their figures. Again, in the real world, you're going to have two closing disclosures. You're going to have one for the buyer and one for the seller. You're not going to see both on the same anymore. We're protecting the consumer. And TRID doesn't feel that it's any of the seller's business what the buyer's numbers are. Here, they just lump them together as an example. But no, in the real world, there's two, one for the buyer and one for the seller. Questions on the closing disclosure? So what's all this mean for us? Well, we have a duty to verify these closing disclosures. We have a duty to verify what we can, what we should reasonably know. First off, you guys remember old car? And specifically, do you remember the A in old car? The A in old cars are accounting, right? We have a duty to help our buyers and sellers make sure that their final numbers are correct. And so when you, the real estate agent, get the closing disclosure, when the attorney will send you both closing disclosures. And when we get that, we have a duty to verify the accuracy of information that we should reasonably know. So let's talk about some things that I should reasonably know. Don't I know the sales price? Don't I know the due diligence amount and the earnest money deposit and any agreed upon seller concessions? Where am I finding this information? How am I verifying that it's right? How do I know what the sales price is? Everyone venture a guess? Yeah. Don't I owe it to my clients to pull out the sales contract and make sure the numbers that they agreed on are right? I don't know about y'all little brain, but my little brain doesn't work like it used to. And if we went under contract 6 weeks ago, I can guarantee you, I don't remember for sure what the sales price is, the due diligence is, the earnest money. So how can I verify that information? I go to my file and I pull out the sales contract. If we renegotiated the purchase price, I need to make sure that the new purchase price is correct. Other things that we can verify. By the time I'm done with you guys on Thursday, you'll know how to prorate taxes. So you'll be able to verify what your buyer or seller are getting charged with is correct. Can you verify your commission? If you're the listing agent, don't you want to verify your commission? I wish I saw more heads shaking yes. Guys, people prepare these things and people make mistakes. Do you ever make a mistake? Occasionally. So does the lender, so does the attorney. As the buyer's agent, you may not be privy to the seller's closing disclosure. If the seller typically pays commission, as the buyer's agent, call the paralegal and say, is my commission correct? You can't verify it. You won't be privy to that information, but you still have the right to verify your commission. I was the listing agent once. The buyer's agent was a guy named Mike. I got the seller's closing disclosure. You know what was not on there? Our commission. And I called the paralegal and I said, Mike and I want to get paid. And she said, and I quote, oopsie. What if I had not verified? But what if I had not found that? Well, I don't know. Our seller was really nice. So I'd like to think she'd have sat down and wrote a check after closing. We could have had a battle on our hand though, right? Things that you can verify, we have a duty of verifying them. Things that I may not be able to verify, for example, I was not part of the conversation that the borrower had with the lender about the lender fees. I wasn't part of that conversation. So I may not know what the lender quoted the buyer. However, I can look at it and make sure it's not an extreme cost. You know, typically loan origination fee is going to be like 1 or 2%. If I see like 12% loan origination fee, I should have a little red flag go up. So we can't verify everything, but we do have a duty to verify what we can. This is not the time to be shy. Failure to report this mistake could result in disciplinary action of the real estate commission because you violated those old car duties. You didn't properly account for your buyers and sellers or sellers' funds. This is why the importance of understanding this is why we introduce you to the idea of this in Unit 21. We're going to look at your buyer's debits and credits. We're going to look at the seller's debits and credits as well. And then when you get to post licensing, I mean, I'm not kidding. I actually hand you a blank closing disclosure, a blank 541 and 542, and let you fill in the blanks to figure out how much the buyer has to bring to closing and how much the seller's going to get. What questions do I have? Over on page 551, let's talk a little bit more about RESPA and some other things that RESPA can do to protect the consumer, other than the 3 days of the loan estimate, the 3 days within closing of the closing disclosure. Let's wrap RESPA up. So a few other things that they do. Any controlled business arrangements need to be disclosed to the consumer. One thing that's growing in popularity is this idea of one-stop shopping. So one thing we're starting to see are these business arrangements come out where you have the real estate agent, maybe the lender, and maybe the attorney all under the same roof. They might share the same location. Even if they share the same location, I can't make my buyer use this attorney. I can't make my buyer use this lender. I always provide 2 or 3 for them to choose from. What I do need to do is if they use this buyer or if they use this lender and we have some kind of controlled business arrangement, we need to disclose that to the consumer. Obviously, your firm will have that verbiage for you. They probably have their own form for you to use to disclose that if you use this lender, if you use this attorney, the real estate firm may benefit from it. We're sharing rent, we're sharing expenses. RESPA has put a borrower credit for a yield spread premium. A yield spread premium is just a fee made to the mortgage broker. Remember, the lender's yield, the higher the yield, the more sellable it is. And if the lender wants to charge for a yield spread premium, RESPA said, that's not really fair for the borrower to pay. It doesn't help them at all. So if there is a charge at settlement, there needs to be a credit back to that borrower. So charge to the mortgage broker. And if there is that charge, if the buyer does pay for it, it needs to be credited back to them at settlement. RESPA put restrictions on the escrow account. Do you know how we've been saying that you charge a 1/12 of your annual taxes and a 1/12 of your annual insurance as part of your monthly payment? RESPA put a limit on that. RESPA said that the lender can only charge a 1/12 of the annual taxes and a 1/12 of the annual insurance. They put a limit on that. Again, my homeowners in the call know that sometimes your mortgage payment goes up. It's not because of your principal and insurance. We already know that that's an amortized loan. That's full level payments. But if your taxes go up next year, then your mortgage payment is going to go up. If your homeowner's insurance go up, then that's going to make that go up. But no matter what it is, they can only charge a 1/12. The other piece of this is how much the lender can charge at settlement to originate the escrow account. There's restrictions on how much the lender can charge the borrower at settlement to create that escrow account. And the lender wants a little bit of cushion. They want a few months cushion. So if taxes do go up next year, they have that money to pay on the borrower's behalf. We'll talk more about that on Thursday when we look at our closing disclosure, our mini closing disclosure. RESPA now says that if the loan is serviced, it must be disclosed to the borrower. It has to be disclosed at the time of application, whether or not the loan can be sold or not. Once the loan has been funded, when it is sold, RESPA requires the borrower get 2 letters. One from the lender that sold it saying, we have serviced your loan. And another letter from the lender that purchased it saying, we now have your loan. So RESPA's put some requirements on loan servicing disclosure, disclosing that information. And then the last thing that RESPA did to protect the consumer, and this is the one that hurt us personally, we can no longer give or receive kickbacks or referral fees for recommending settlement service providers. It used to be, man, it used to be good. You recommend your buyer to a lender and they give you a gift. You recommend your buyer to this home inspector and they'd put your name in a hat for a big drawing at the end of the year. It used to be a lot of fun. RESPA said, no more. We can no longer give or receive kickbacks or referral fees for recommending settlement service providers. You and I are settlement service provider. The attorney, the home inspector, the surveyor. You guys remember all those gears? All those gears, all those people that helped us in this contract to closing process, even the lender is a settlement service provider. They said, no more. So here's just a couple of examples of how things used to be. You want to know how life used to be? Home inspector pays a real estate broker a $25 referral fee for each buyer the broker refers to the home inspector. As a buyer's agent, where am I sending my buyer? To this home inspector every single time, right? So I can get my cut. I want my $25. Is this the best home inspection for this buyer? I don't care. I want my $25. RESPA said, this has to stop. It's got to be what's in the best interest of the borrower. Another one says, for each borrower referred by a real estate broker, a mortgage loan officer places a number drawing ticket into a box and gives the broker a stub. At a pre-designated point in time, a ticket is drawn and the broker with the winning ticket receives an all expenses paid cruise. Heck yeah. Where am I sending every single buyer? What lender am I having them talk to? Every single time. RESPA said, stop it. Whose best interest is this in? Is this in my buyer's best interest? Not to receive a gift, it's in mine, isn't it? And we're protecting the consumer, not the real estate agent. RESPA says, I cannot receive $1. I cannot receive a donut for recommending settlement service providers. The only thing that this home inspector and this lender can do is call me and say, thank you. That's it. No monetary compensation whatsoever. Now that we are moving on from the pandemic, lenders and home inspectors and all these people are starting to make appearances at the office again. They like, I'm telling you guys, if you like donuts, you're getting in the right industry. Because I don't know that I very rarely go into the office and there's not a dang box of donuts in there. So the lender can bring a box of donuts and a stack of their business cards. And they can set these in the conference room and say, this is for everybody, help yourself. What they can't do is come in and say, you, and you get a donut because you sent me business last month. Do we see the difference? They can provide for all. Why are they providing donuts? Well, because they want us to call them. They want us to use them. But they can't thank you for previously sending them business. And when I say they're coming back out, last week we had a lender do our sales meeting, offered to do our sales meeting, talk about their products. It was really interesting. And he brought us lunch. Isn't that nice? He brought us lunch, but it's available to all of us. Y'all know while we were sitting there with our lender hearing his little spiel, because with lunch, you got the spiel, right? Well, we were listening to his little spiel. How about another lender came in with Valentine's Day candy? Oh, it was awkward. Oh, it was awkward. They're starting to come back out. They're starting to come out and leave their cards, leave themselves known. So we use, that's exactly why they're there. So we use them, but they can't target just me because I sent them business last year. Always give your buyers choices. Here are the name of 2 or 3 lenders I've used in the past. Here are the name of 3 home inspectors. Here are the names of 3 attorneys. Let them make choices. They can go to Google. They can do research on the 3 that you recommend. What we can't do anymore is say, this is the lender you're going to use and you're going to like it. This is the home inspector you're going to use. They're the ones that are spending the money. They should have the choice on who they use. And they're going to look at you because most buyers don't know home inspector. And this is why we form relationships. And if you're new and you don't know home inspector, I'd be willing to bet that your firm has a preferred vendor list. So you can say, here's a list of 3 home inspectors that other agents in my office have used. Until you start forming those relationships where you have your own. Questions on that? Comments? They took the fun out of everything. Consumer protection. So, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Well, penalties for violating RESPA, you could be looking at $10,000 per violation. You could be looking at 1 year in imprisonment. An injunction is a legal stop. The court could put an injunction on you and tell you not to engage in real estate activities while we're investigating this. Any damage that you're liable for, you could have to compensate the victims, compensate your buyer or seller. And then there could also be, you could be on the hook for paying court costs plus treble damages. Y'all know how many treble damages are? You take the amount of damages and you times it by 3. So let me ask you guys, is it worth a $25 Target gift card? Not really, is it? Is it worth a donut? Dang it, that better be a good donut. I've never had a donut that good before. And hear me when I say, we cannot give or receive. So even if they try to give you something, we say, I can't accept that. Questions? So we're going to start our settlement statement discussion today. We won't actually pick our calculator up until Thursday. So everybody come ready. And before we go, and before I forget, I'm not ready to go just yet. But please remember, if you haven't already, I asked you guys to look at pages 561 and 562 over the weekend. So 561 and 562 gives us a breakdown. What are things that are debits to the seller, debits to the buyer, credit to the buyer, credit to the seller. We will break those down and look at those as well. But I do think familiarizing yourself with 561 and 562 will better prepare you for the math that we're going to do on Thursday. Let's call 561 and 562 your formula for the math that we're going to do on Thursday. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please do that before Thursday. And to start our settlement statement discussion, I first want to show you guys where all in the book you can find information about settlement statement math. So in your book, pages 553, which is where we are, we're talking about all this, of course. 553 to 556 gives you some good information. The math concept for unit 21 are 556 and 562. We're going to introduce you guys to prorating on Thursday. Go way back. That's not a typo. Go way back to unit 3. Remember in unit 3, we calculated the annual property taxes. Now we're going to learn how to prorate those. So there's some proration scenarios back in unit 3 on page 61 that I told you guys to skip for now. But now that we're here, and then there's that math facts section in the back of the book that has some other information as well. So the discussion of the settlement statement and where we're getting this information, this math, can all be found on these pages. So as our little introduction to our settlement statement math, the good news is we're only dealing with debits and credits. Debit is an amount owed, an amount to be paid. It's money that they owe at settlement. A credit is an amount you have coming in on your behalf. When we log out of class in just a minute, and you run to the grocery store to buy groceries, and you get to the cash register, and you swipe your card, how does that show on your statement? Doesn't that show as a debit? That's money you have going out, money to be paid to Harris Teeter. When you get home from the grocery store and you check the mail, and lo and behold, there's an unexpected check from a long lost relative. Sweet. And you immediately run and deposit that thing into your account. How does that a check work on your behalf? It shows up as a credit. It's money coming in. So debit's money going out, Credit is money coming in. Questions? I really hate to go any further, knowing we got to stop in a few minutes. So you know what? For your third and final Valentine's Day present today, we're going to let you go. Goodness, you guys had a good day. So we're going to let you go a few minutes early. We'll pick back up on here again. We're going to talk about a few more things on Thursday before we actually do this math. So again, I really encourage you guys to look at pages 561 and 562. I'm telling you, it goes a long way in better understanding this math we're going to go on Thursday. Everybody good with that? All right. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Have a good day tomorrow. We'll see you back here 9 a.m. Thursday morning. We'll do it again.